Hey guys, today we are once again talking about Canada and Canada's foreign policy with Michael Goldberg from Toronto. He's current student of London School of Economics and member of Canadian Society. Hi, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Uh, we will start with the news. The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has just left the cabinet, and now we are facing new reality under new Prime Minister Mark Carney taking the post. And what are your thoughts? What's the probable influence of this change, the shift in the government of Canada, and how might affect its foreign policy for now?
Yeah, well, I think the last couple of months in Canadian politics have been sort of the most exciting months in Canadian politics in years, and I think it's impossible to understate just how big the change is. Because so before Trudeau resigned a few months ago, it was basically a guarantee that the Liberal Party, which is Trudeau's party, was going to lose the next election. For years, Trudeau's popularity has been plummeting. He's been incredibly unpopular, and it was basically a guarantee that the Conservative Party, which is like the more right wing party, was going to win the next election. But now, since Trudeau's resigned, the entire outlook has shifted, and it seems now that the Liberals are leading in the polls again under their new leader, Mark Carney. It seems like, most likely they're going to win. So the entire landscape has shifted in a matter of months. And I think as well, like people didn't really expect Trudeau to resign. There was a lot of people, even within his own party, that assumed he was going to stay on. He said he was going to run again. He kept on saying, "I'm going to run again. I'm going to run again," even though he was incredibly personally unpopular. So it was a big surprise. I mean, if you told me in January that we would be here right now, I mean, it was predictable in some ways. Like this guy who's currently in power, Mark Carney, has been rumored to be wanting to run for prime minister for years and rumored to be entering politics for years. But the fact that it's actually happened so fast and now we're here and it seems like he might win, it's been a pretty exciting few months. And also, obviously, there's this new sort of Trump existential threat, which is really the major factor behind all of this. And none of this would have happened without these tariffs and Trump in power. And so, in a way, I mean, for liberal supporters at least, these tariffs are terrible for the economy and for the world, obviously. But for the liberals' political outlooks, it's a boon for them, honestly.
Actually, the tariffs. Mark Carney just has announced that Canada will have their own tariffs against American ones, and it also will be 25%. So it's a mirror response. So is it unexpected to hear from liberal prime minister? Is it something that they would never? You think that they would never do um, in the same situation? I mean, the Conservative Party seems to be much more decisive and much more assertive than liberal. So they might just adjust to the new reality, or what are they doing actually, and how that might affect also Canada's choice on the elections, such
Yeah,
Canada
well,
or in
sorry,
Poland.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's true. That was sort of the impression under Trudeau, that they were sort of indecisive and they get less things done, and the Conservatives want to portray themselves as being more, this is we get stuff done. But I think it's a totally different picture under Mark Carney. And even when Trump initially announced the tariffs and Trudeau was still in office, there's been this sort of rising to the occasion, this sort of recognition that it's an unprecedented moment. So they have to be decisive, and we have the United States sort of questioning our sovereignty. So the leader who's in charge at the time has to take a decisive stance. I mean, it's sort of a moment for the country to unite together. And I think in terms of the political ramifications of that, it's been a huge benefit to the Liberals for being the ones in power at this sort of existential moment of crisis where there's this big surge of like patriotism in Canada, and the fact that the Liberals are the ones who are in those meetings with the U.S. and talking on the phone to Trump and coming out and giving those speeches about how we got to unite as a country and we got to buy Canadian, and all these things, the fact that the liberals are the ones in power is really beneficial to them. And I think Polyev, in this moment, who's the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Polyev, has seemed really weak and not really saying much of substance. And he's kind of suddenly become like a background character, whereas for the past few years he was sort of the main character aside from Trudeau. And yeah, I think Mark Carney himself, he's an economist. He's I think went to Oxford, went to LSE, has a PhD in economics, and he worked as a central banker for many years. So he's really ideally set up for this moment. And he doesn't have the political baggage of Trudeau. I mean, a lot of the conservative attacks on him trying to link him to Trudeau and say he's just a sort of more the same of Trudeau. But I think he's his own politician. And it's interesting that the Liberal Party is basically a centrist party, and he's even maybe a little bit right of center. So they're liberal in name, but they're not necessarily very left leaning. And yeah, so he's sort of wiped away Trudeau's like further left policies in a way and focused really on rising to this economic challenge, which is really in his wheelhouse of expertise. So
it's very very interesting because the same things they happen everywhere. This move from center to towards a little bit towards right, and we are witnessing it even in Germany, in Europe, everywhere. So
yep.
And given this such a shift which is happening elsewhere, do you think this first of all, tariff war launched Donald Trump and all that was entailed by that, is that in Canada-US relations, is that long-term new reality that we should accept and that we should live in, or you think it's just some people say Trump's first attempts to just like try the soil and see what happens?
I mean, it's so hard to say. I mean, I'd like to think it's the latter, but I think probably more likely it's the former, or at least we have to think like it's the former because, I mean, Trump's just so unpredictable. But the fact that, the fact that it's been so terrible for the markets and the economic effect is just going to be so awful. Like, I don't know. I'm no economic expert, but I can't see the logic in it. So you would think eventually the American people or Trump's team will come around and, pull back from the tariffs, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. And already, I mean, just within, how many months, 3 months has it been since Trump's came into power, we've had to start looking elsewhere. So I think, I think it's the new reality that Canada specifically, but the rest of the world as well, can't rely on the US anymore. And I think we'll have to get closer to Europe. And one important way, or one thing we need to do if we're going to get closer to Europe, I think, is increase our defense spending, because Canada's never met these. Canada doesn't meet these 2% NATO targets for defense spending, and I think that's a real issue with our alliance with Europe, or holds us back a little bit in that way. And I think under Carney, maybe not under Polyev, but I think under Carney, that's definitely something that'll increase probably immediately as a way to increase or improve our relationship with Europe and move away from a reliance on the US. Because, hopefully, I think even if he pulls back on the tariffs, he's not going to pull back on this rhetoric about Canada being the 51st state. And even if he does, the damage is done. I mean, obviously our alliance is still going to be important. And I think, we're married by geography and shared history and all this stuff. But I think too much damage has been done now to come back to where we were, and I think as a result, we'll never go back to the same status quo that we were at, even 6 months ago.
So you mentioned that Canada should move away from the US towards probably Europe and find someone else to balance the situation. But do you think that is the way? So is it plausible to believe that the EU or any other structure that might emerge in Europe can also encompass Canada, which is in completely different geography? And because I'm asking because we had Professor Patrick James from Southern University of Southern California, and he's very pessimistic about all this stuff. So, what's your point? How do you see maybe probable cooperation between Canada and Europe?
I mean, I don't think Canada should necessarily join the EU. We're not in Europe. We're not, a European country. We have very similar values in a lot of ways to Europe, but we're still, different. And we already all are quite close with Europe. We're, part of NATO and lots of other alliances. I think it's just important to, keep those alliances strengthened and develop new, stronger trade alliances as well as we move away from the US. But I don't think that means Canada should join the EU, and I don't see a future where Canada joins the EU, at least not in the near future.
But don't you think that any sort of new alliances, even economic, not political or military, might provoke Donald Trump for next steps against Canada, might fuel his sort of, I don't know, hatred towards Canada, and make him take some other steps?
I forget where I heard this, but I read somewhere Trump said something like, his whole thing about where he called, Prime Minister Trudeau, Governor Trudeau, and this whole thing about the 51st state. He just says things, like literally just pulls it out of midair, and then it becomes a reality in his head. I don't think he really hates Canada. I think he came up with this idea to say, oh, Governor Trudeau, they should be the 51st state. And then he got a lot of support from his base, and he runs with it. I think, I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to think Trump has some sort of grand strategy or grand, anything in terms of foreign policy. So I don't think, I mean, first of all, I don't think the U.S. would ever take military action against Canada. Hopefully I'm right in that. But even if we were to seek new alliances, it's just like a pragmatic reality at this point. We don't really have much other choice. If it provokes Trump, so be it. I mean, he's already put all these tariffs on us. How much worse could it get? I don't think we're going to become the 51st state. I don't think they're going to launch a military invasion.
Michael, you know that the Canadian potential in terms of even political cohesion of Canada is quite vulnerable, and we know Quebec and its strive towards independence and all this stuff. Don't you think that the U.S. might, under Trump administration or after, might just utilize that? Because for me at least, maybe not for you, all what's happening now is quite systemic. It's not an error. It's has been growing and growing inside the United States for a long period of time, and now we see it. So don't you feel this threats, and how might by you I mean Canadians tackle these problems? I mean,
yeah, I mean, definitely it's true, they're real threats. I don't mean to dismiss them as just like a silly, insults by a bullying leader. And it's definitely not just, I think Trump's a symptom of the moment, not just doesn't all come directly from Trump himself. But I still think this idea that the US could play on this division within Canada, I think the Canadian national identity is it's weak. It's true that there's not such a strong unifying Canadian national identity, but if we've seen anything from this moment of tariffs, it's that it's not entirely weak and that we can come together as a country. So yeah, it's true that Quebec, for example, doesn't necessarily agree with the rest of the country, or for example, Alberta is a much more conservative, right-leaning province. They have their own really conservative premier who's gone over to meet with Trump and sort of gets in bed with Trump in a way. But then when we have these sort of existential moments, it improves the Canadian identity is still stronger. As much as Quebec might hate, the government in Ottawa, for example, they hate the U.S. more in this moment, at least. And yeah, so I think this idea that the U.S. could threaten national cohesion, it's definitely possible. But I think it's like any country, you have your own internal squabbles when the stakes are low internationally, but then when there's a national threat, you band together and rally around the flag, as we call it in our international relations courses. So I don't know what we can do to prevent against this Trump moment, other than investing more in our military and taking strong economic measures and not giving in to Trump, which I think is what Carney has been doing so far. And I also think that in terms of the election, I think in a lot of the rhetoric in the election in Canada is like this guy Pierre Poilievre, who's the opposition leader, has been in politics for his entire career. He doesn't have much experience outside of politics or any real work experience outside of politics, and he's made his whole last several number of years on just being anti-Trudeau. Trudeau does badly on this, Trudeau does badly on that. So, for example, his biggest gripe with Trudeau was this carbon tax, and as soon as Carney came into power on the first day, he got rid of the carbon tax. So it kind of blows his whole campaign plan in half. And additionally, the gripe that the Conservatives have with Carney is that he's never been in political office before in his life. He's never been elected to political office, and he's worked, in finance, and he's been this corporate executive. So it was kind of a boogeyman from the sort of worker left-wing perspective. But I think that's kind of the ideal thing that we want in this moment. We want someone who's, been responsible for central banks and has experienced negotiating high-power financial deals. That's who we need in power at the moment. So I think it's kind of the ideal moment for Carney's political career to take off. And I think we've also seen that, even though Carney himself isn't necessarily as talented of a politician or, as charismatic on the stump as Poilievre is, for example, it doesn't matter because the fact that he's in office and his experience and his policies so far kind of speak for themselves. So even if he's politically a little weaker, policy-wise, he's quite strong.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if I answered the question directly.
Going back to the question of threats and national identity, you mentioned the weak Canadian national identity. Do you see any change, any shift, reshaping, maybe some sort of emerging new Canadian identity that we might see after those elections, and help thanks to Donald Trump, or it's just rally around the flag and nothing else?
Yeah, it's hard to say whether anything will last. I mean,
As Canadians,
yeah.
You feel this connectedness, this relatedness more than previously, and
Certainly.
maybe some your personal experience that you got from your peers from Canada.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's never been. I mean, obviously the U.S. has their whole patriotism, greatest country in the world, all this stuff. I think in Canada we kind of look at that and roll our eyes and think it's a little bit gross. I mean, not that many people in Canada. People thinking of themselves as Canadian, they're proud to be Canadian. You see all these stereotypes about Canada's so friendly and open and blah 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 blah. But no one really is there's not such a sense of patriotism in Canada. We don't have a very big military. There's it's an extremely diverse country. People come from all over the world. It's a country of immigrants. There's not such a strong this is what the Canadian identity is. This is who we are as Canadians. This is what we believe. Those things exist, but it's not something you think about every day. Like in the U.S., you think about free speech, guns. Those kind of things are really so present in your life in the U.S. That's not the same in Canada. But I think in the past few months, we've really seen this surge of patriotism. So this sort of buy Canadian movement or has been a huge thing. All the provinces got rid of all these American liquor companies, for example. All products now have a little flag saying "Made in Canada," and I think people are really feeling this is the time to be proud of our Canadian heritage and become more patriotic. But that said, I still don't think it's going to be a long-term shift. I mean, the Canadian identity is sort of the fact that we're a really diverse country and the fact that we're kind of friendly and open. It's not a really strong patriotic identity. That's just not what Canada is. So I don't know how long this, made in Canada movement will last, but I think it demonstrates that people do care a lot about Canada, and we're not the same as the US, and we don't want to be part of the US. And we're proud to be a sovereign country. And yeah, we'll stay that way.
Talking about Canada's foreign policy and the project of Global Canada, which was first launched by the previous Prime Minister before Justin Trudeau, if I'm not mistaken, this idea of Canada going global and seeing itself as part of not only the region but the world. So I'm just curious, how do you see Canada's actions in current situation around Ukraine? Because I know that in Canada there is a huge Ukrainian diaspora and probably the biggest in the world. So do you see this influence, and if so, might it be like a factor turning Canada global to some extent, global middle power, or you don't think so?
Well, I think it still comes back to this. I mean, maybe this is my IR sort of realist perspective, but I think it comes back to this idea of like our military is not very strong. We don't invest a lot in the military. Our military can't do that much. We were once a middle power, and I think we still think of ourselves as a middle power. But I don't know if it's really fair to say that we are. I'd say a lower middle power in terms of our military strength. But it's true that we have this. Yeah, we support Ukraine, and we do, what we can and provide a lot of assistance and aid to Ukraine. I don't know the exact figures, but definitely Canada's been a strong ally of Ukraine, even in this, the wake of Trump sort of backing down on American support for Ukraine. I think Canada's been part of that group of European countries and allies around the world that have really been supporting Ukraine. And I think there was this big meeting in London a few months ago where Trudeau showed up, and so I think we try and make our voices heard in the international community. We try and represent our values, which are the same values as our NATO partners for the most part, other than maybe the US in this day and age. But I think our impact is only so big at the moment because we don't invest that much in our military. But I think like we'll see in the future that our impact will become more important, and I think we're going to have to increase our military spending. Areas like the Arctic are going to become much more important. They already are becoming more important, and Canada has a huge Arctic, so we'll have to increase our role, I think, a little bit. And I think Mark Carney, when he comes to power, would be good at that.
Yeah. Actually, you've mentioned the Arctic region, and actually Canada has built an observation station in the northern part of its territory to just control missile attacks and all this stuff, and it has just started building this station. So in terms of Arctics, I think Iceland. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm always confusing those two. Greenland. Greenland. What's the role of Greenland for Canada? Do you know whether it is obvious for Canadians that Greenland should stay as either independent state or within Denmark, not becoming Donald Trump's new territory? And also, do you know if there is any like ties, maybe common projects in Greenland and Canada, and maybe something like that? Any interests of Canada, Greenland?
Yeah, I don't know. I think
because Greenland is much closer to Canada than to the United States, and given the current situation and the strive towards independence of Greenlanders, Canada could have made some contribution to this.
Yeah, definitely. I think regarding the whole U.S. taking over Greenland, I don't know exactly what the Canadian government stance would be. I think probably we want to focus on our problems with the U.S. Because they're pretty big for us at the moment. We don't want to stir the pot too much regarding that, but I think definitely Canadians are against this idea that the US can just bully countries into submission and bully smaller countries into giving them their territory, because it's the same thing they're trying to do to us. And in terms of the strategic interests, I get like it makes sense. I think that the US would want more Arctic territory. Canada already has a huge amount of Arctic territory. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'd imagine Canada's Arctic is just as big, if not bigger than, probably bigger than Greenland. So yeah, I imagine there's I don't know exactly what the partnership is, but we do have both a lot of strategic territory in the same region in the world, and
Can
yeah.
you can you imagine Canada witnessing annexation of Greenland, doing nothing with that?
No, I don't think so. But again, like it depends on the nature of the annexation. I guess like the thing is Greenland only has 50,000 people, right? If they want to vote in favor of the U.S., it's not that. It seems that's not what they want at the moment, but it's not that difficult to imagine that 50,000 people could be swayed to vote for to join a wealthier country than Denmark. But I mean, the rhetoric at the moment is like, why would they want to join a country that's such a bully to them and a bully to the rest of the world, and is in like their worst moment in many centuries. So not many centuries, but many years. If I was in Greenland, I would not want to join the US, at least.
As we know, the majority of Greenlanders, they do not want to do so, but under this pressure and of Donald Trump's administration, who knows what happens after they gain independence. But anyways, probably the last.
Could I add another point about Greenland?
Yeah, for sure.
I guess this just I remember this, but another link between Canada and Greenland is there's some of the same indigenous groups that live in Greenland and live in Canada, and I think there's a lot of shared heritage there. So culturally, I think there's probably a much greater connection between Canada and Greenland than there is the U.S. and Greenland. Even if I don't know the exact indigenous populations in Alaska, but I know like the Inuit people, for example, in Nunavut in Canada, are similar culturally to some groups in Greenland.
Maybe this indigenous people living in Canada may somehow put pressure on the government and make Canada to take some steps to protect the same population in Greenland, or it's unlikely.
But then again, they don't really. I mean, the relationship between indigenous groups in Canada and the federal government is a little bit contentious in and of itself. So I'm not sure how that dynamic would play out exactly. But I do think, I don't know if Canada would sit idly by and keep letting the U.S. bully Greenland. I mean, we want our sovereignty to be respected, and we want the sovereignty of other countries to be respected in the same way.
So yeah, and probably the last question for this session.
Mm-hmm.
As I said in the beginning of the interview, we are now witnessing the rise of populism everywhere, in every single country, and given the upcoming elections and all this rivalry between liberal and conservative parties, do you see that Canada's political culture is immune against the populism? So is it the case for Canada to get a populist prime minister, not maybe now, but after Carney, or not? How do you think? Does it have immune system that might prevent it?
You say, is it immune?
Yes.
No, certainly not. Canada's definitely not immune to populism, but I think so. Prior to Carney coming to power, Trudeau has been extremely unpopular, especially since COVID. I'm not sure if you remember these, or I'm not sure if it was international news, but there were these big protests in Ottawa, the capital of Canada, this freedom convoy of all these truckers sort of blocking the downtown core of Ottawa, the whole Parliament area, with these trucks for weeks, just honking the horns of their trucks, and really like the strong sort of anti-vaccine mandate protests. And ever since then, there's been I think that was represented the beginning of a major shift in Canadian politics, or maybe not the beginning, but a sort of the loudest moment in this major shift in Canadian politics where, yeah, I mean, we do have the same problems as any other country. I think we could be just as susceptible to populism as other countries. And I think Polyev is a wannabe populist in a lot of ways. He uses the same sort of playbook as a lot of populist leaders, the same campaign tactics. But now I think the challenge is that he's trying to move away from that because Carney has come in and gotten rid of this whole Trudeau sort of foe for the Conservatives. So I think maybe not in this present moment. I think what we've realized is that it's not a majority, but a minority of people who want that kind of government in Canada. And I think people are willing to. I think a lot of supporters of the more left-leaning party, the National Democratic Party in Canada, have moved over to the Liberal Party to prevent like Polyev from coming into power. So I think there's not enough support at the moment to win federally, but I think it's very possible in the coming years that we'll have a populist leader, and it's just the same as any other country, especially with regards to immigration. Canada's a country of immigrants, but there's been huge increases in certain immigrant groups in recent years. Immigration policy has sort of been Trudeau's immigration policy has been flawed and unpopular, and I think that often fuels a rise in populist leaders. Like in Ontario, for example, which is the province I'm from, the leader is certainly a populist leader, and he just won his third mandate by a lot of votes, by a very, very large majority, and there's basically no strong opposition to him. So he could also, I think, run federally and be quite popular. So we'll see what happens there.
Let's hope that urbanization of Canada won't happen in upcoming 4 years.
Yeah, let's hope not.
It would be the best thing.
No.
Michael, for the thorough and very deep conversation. I think that we will talk about the outcomes of the elections when they happen, after they happen. So let's call it, yeah. So like our videos, share. Thank you for watching us.
Thanks for having me.